Thank you everybody for joining us here at Shift Pixie's channel. Just want to let you all know what we're going to be doing with this here interview series. We'll be talking about the company. We'll be talking about the industry. We'll be answering any of your guys' questions. So if you have any during any of this, do not be afraid to send them over. We will, of course, be introducing and talking to members of the team. So who better to kick us off for video number one than co-founder and chief executive officer of the company, Scott Absher. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Michael. Thanks for taking time with me.
Yeah. I really want to get to know you here and really introduce you to the audience, paint a picture of your past, who you are, and your motivation, so to speak. So tell us a bit about your past experience prior to getting involved with Shift Pixie. What gave you like that entrepreneurial spark to become a businessman in the first place?
Well, when I got out of college, I kind of fell into a business that you could kind of build your living or your income out of reoccurring revenue. In other words, there were products that people were using over and over again. And I enjoyed the way the kind of metrics of that type of work where you could put a strong effort together and you could get paid for it the next month and the next month and the next month. So that became kind of the original spark for me. And in that industry that I started off in, I gravitated to, in my case, it was retail packaging. What I loved about that was it was a little bit creative because a lot of the stuff that I was introducing to the market, I was one of those guys nationally that if you were in that industry and you wanted to open up a market or you wanted to introduce a retail type of packaging idea to the marketplace, I was one of those guys that you would do that with. And so I was very involved in a lot of product development and product launches and product introductions to almost every national retailer, and really enjoyed that work. Over time, though, it became some of the items became commodity items. So whenever the margins start shrinking and the drive for market share starts to go up, it becomes a little less interesting of a business to be in, and the creative aspects of the business get a little less interesting. At the end of that journey, I did patent a unique application tied to the retail packaging. So that was kind of a nice way to put a bow on that part of my career. But as I wrapped up my career there, I started gravitating into the human capital management space. And it was a fairly new business at the time, or a fairly new concept. And it was initially called employee leasing. And the idea was that a small business could take and their employee administrative duties and responsibilities and then hand those off to another third-party firm. And in that third-party firm, we would actually take care of all those duties, all the reporting, all the maintenance and management on behalf of the owner. And it was since it was a new concept, and that was right in my wheelhouse, taking and new concepts to market, I jumped on that opportunity and in that industry with a lot of enthusiasm, and became one of those pioneers in that niche of the human capital management space.
And what year was this? So when was this all coming together?
So I transitioned out of the retail packaging industry in about 1996, but I had started my journey to understand this new concept of employee leasing back in about 1990, and went at it. I was juggling a career, so I kind of made it a hobby. Is how I had to treat it while I was learning the subtleties of the industry. How buyers would buy this type of a transaction and what the impacts would be for the buyer. So I took my time in kind of learning that new industry.
Interesting. So then, okay, you're kind of painting a good picture of how you wound up where you are today with Shift Pixie. So now bring us into that story then. So
Sure.
Fast forward a little bit and tell us like how this idea started formulating and turning into Shift Pixie.
Sure. There were while I was in the human capital management space, I was doing so in introducing the concept in Southern California. And at the time, the late 90s, it was the dot-com boom started happening. And one of the things that I did is focused our sales team on going after and introducing our company to technology firms. The idea being at the time that industry was exploding at explosive growth, that we might be able to pull on a client where we'd handle all their human capital and HR responsibilities. They might start with 5 people, but through getting funded and pursuing their market, they could be, by the end of the year, 50 to 100 employees. So I focused everybody on that. Plus, I had a real passion at the time for technology. I did my own software development, and I wrote code even. So I was very passionate about that. And we made good connections with those types of companies. Well, in that process, I was able to get completely immersed in how fast technology was emerging and how new extensions of the technology. This is at the very beginning when nobody had websites, nobody had emails. And I started to see a path to how technology could really improve business communication, business connections with customers, business connections with employees. So I spent a lot of time in that space, and kind of lesser so in the human capital management space, but I still kept my toes in that space over those years in some form or capacity. I did a lot of M&A in that business. So I always kept connected to it. But fast forward in about this probably would have been about 2012, 2013, I had a chance meeting with my co-founder in Shift Pixie. And one of the things that we talked about, number one, we were surprised that we didn't know each other. We hadn't met each other earlier on in our careers, and that we were just now getting to know one another. But the other was that we both shared the same passion for that business, that human capital management business, and how it liberated small business owners. And and we talked about what that business could ultimately become. What sorts of things might we do with that business? And we even came to the point over time that we thought, it might be fun to be in business together. In May of 2015, he called me with an idea because of a problem he was running into with his customers. And his side of the pool, he was focused on multi-unit restaurant operators. And in doing that, most of us in the human capital management space stayed away from that. And the reason we did was because they had a high concentration or reliance on part-time labor. And that for us, it meant high turnover. And if I'm handling your HR stack and you have part-time labor, I'm doing these duties over and over and over and over again. It makes it really hard to monetize well that relationship with those types of clients. But nonetheless, he liked that type of business because he didn't have any of us as competitors in it. But what was happening for him back in May of 2015 was that a lot of his clients were coming to him and saying, could you help me find people? And he thought that was a strange request. He said, look, in the 30 years that I've been doing this, no one's ever asked me that, because there are companies that help you do that. We don't. You find them, you hire them, and we'll manage them. And so it was never part of the conversation. But what was interesting was all of his clients looked at him in this region in Southern California. They all were doing something similar. They're all in the fast food business. They all used essentially the same type of employees. So the natural conclusion was, you got all these employees being processed on your platform. Could we have access to them? And so he thought about that problem and concluded that there might be a way to do this. And that's what he called me with. He said, listen, he said, you know the technology space, and you know how this might be constructed. And so here's my idea. He was telling me about the calls he was getting, and he said, what if we could break these processing silos for each of these clients just a little bit to allow them to employees to be shared across the common scheduling platform? And when he shared that story with me, it was like I was struck by lightning, because it pushed me back into an earlier conversation I had in that probably a few years earlier, where in my world in Southern California, I was using my platform, my human capital management platform, as a backstop for a compulsory form of insurance that is required in all 50 states in the U.S., and that's workers' compensation coverage. And we became kind of a regular backstop for that type of product. And in doing that, I would be brought weird clients that nobody could find a home for, that didn't fit the insurance markets very well. And it could be for one reason or another, just the odd labor component. So one of my brokers in LA called me and said, maybe you can help me figure this out. He said, this is a weird company. And they dealt with a lot of transportation in taxi companies and that sort of thing. And he said, this company, he said, it's sort of like a taxi company, but they don't own any of their own equipment. He said, what they do is they let people who have cars connect with people who are looking for rides over a smartphone.
Sounds very familiar, Scott.
That's it. And it was at the very early days, even for smartphones. So I dutifully, we had two tasks. Number one, we had to determine whether or not they were asking, do we have a workers' comp exposure because of our business? The second was, how do we meter the coverage? It's always tied to a payrolling component. And so we spent the time listening to their business, how an opportunity was captured, how it was turned into work, how the work, excuse me, had to be performed, and then also how it was compensated for. And what we concluded was that in all 50 states, that they did have a workers' comp exposure because of how they described the workflows. Secondly, we came up with a way to micrometer that coverage on a per shift basis so they could add that into their fixed overhead. At the end of that analysis, the company thanked us for it. They said, listen, we appreciate the work that you did. We understand the concepts that you are recommending that we do have an exposure, but our lawyers don't think that we do. And they thanked me nonetheless. And before I left the conversation, I said, look, I'm going to tell you two things that are important for you to hear. Number one, you wouldn't be the first company to spend good money on bad legal advice. I said, there's things that your attorneys don't know and don't understand about the issues here. Number two is that what often happens in the commercial insurance world, that if you've been without coverage and you should have had coverage, and by the time comes where you have to make good on that, and it will come for you, the state commissioners may make you go back to the inception of your business and cover all that premium that was not contributed into the system. And that company was Lyft. And I remember at the time thinking that here I've been dealing with this body of settled law and managing these components for a number of decades, and a new company walks up with a new widget and says, we don't have to comply. So that was the spark, the lightning bolt, when my co-founder called me, because I said, this is going to be much bigger than you know. We're going to take everything we know about the compliant employer relationship, and we're going to distill it down to one shift at a time. And we're going to do it through a very elegant, fully mobilized technology. And that's what we set out to do starting in 2015, to build that type of platform that would allow brick and mortar operators now to compete in this new gig economy. And the reason that my co-founder in 2015 was getting these inquiries from his part-time labor-based fast food worker demand was because there were new opportunities for work now. Now people could just flip on their smartphone and they could work anytime, anywhere, and they didn't have to be tied to a location. And when these gig platforms took hold in the marketplace, starting back in earlier than 2015, because the birth of Uber was in 2009. But when it was born, it was born into this perfect storm where the collapse of Wall Street had just happened a quarter earlier, and you had 8 million people now that were considered underemployed that now had to find a way to reconstruct income, where normally they would go work part-time in retail or restaurants to reconstruct that income. Now they could just turn on their smartphone and do that. And when that happened, starting in 2009, and it didn't really take hold until about 2015, now, if you were a brick and mortar operator and you had a reliance on part-time labor, you were competing against all these new market influences. So we kind of were hatched the business at the beginning of the perfect storm. And then for us, when we started the business in 2015, we really got to a place where we could introduce our technology in about 2017, 2018, because we were busy building it and building the relationships with the clients. About the time we're ready to emerge in the market, COVID hits. And then all of a sudden, everybody's scrambling.
Bad timing, man.
It was really bad timing. But for us, what it did do is it gave us, another wave of human capital disruption. The first one was because of the gig economy platforms disrupting, but COVID really fortified that proposition, and it put us in a very interesting position now where we had everybody's attention, and our conversation started to be about rethinking human capital. How do you connect with them? How do you make sure that you navigate the new preferences in the market? And that's taken us on a very interesting journey with this focus on part-time labor.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really cool to see how the story's been formulating and kind of percolating for years there, and how it kind of came to be. So on the next video, Scott, I would love to go deeper into Shift Pixie and talk about the different parts of the business, paths to revenue, what's happening now, what's happening next. But wrapping up today, tell me more about being the Chief Executive Officer of Shift Pixie and what that means to you, what that looks like on the day-to-day that you handle.
Well, number one, I'm probably the least likely guy to be sitting in the CEO seat. It's thankless a lot of times. You got to make a lot of tough decisions. I just had that conversation with some of our staff. Being a small public company and navigating the capital markets. Fortunately, I had a lot of experience in that, in working with a lot of investment banks and other capital market participants in the past. So I had a good foundation for it, but it's a tough thing. There are times you got to make really tough decisions. You've got to separate yourself from non-productive either employees or relationships, and it's a tough thing. And it's sometimes a bloody mess. Yeah. But it's really no one should really aspire to have to do this. If it happens to be that it shows up on your desk and somebody's got to do the job, that's one thing. But I don't recommend people chase after it.
I've heard that story where a member of the board was like, and then unfortunately I was elected to be the CEO, and now here I am. Yeah. It's definitely a lot of responsibility that falls on the CEO's shoulders, and it's not, you got to be the good guy and the bad guy and everything in between all the time to keep the business afloat. So I guess what is on the day-to-day, give us some of the things that you handle in terms of how you push the company forward. Like, so give us some examples of decisions you've had to make this week, so to speak.
Sure. One of the things that we did is we set the company up in such a way that I'm always the largest part of the cap table. And the reason we do that is that I have to make decisions that are not just good for the shareholders, they're also good for me. And so, some people might interpret it as self-serving, but the fact is that my success is perfectly aligned with the success of the business. If the business doesn't succeed, I don't either. And I don't have other assets. I have kind of all my eggs in one basket, if you will. So it really requires you to think about the business differently. It's not just a stewardship thing; it's a growth thing. I'm obsessed with growth. I'm a little frustrated that we haven't been able to continue the rapid growth we had earlier on. COVID was a part of that. We made some market pivots that contributed to that, but I think we're on a path now to really hyper accelerate that growth. We did some interesting things that we'll talk about another time. But in the dailies, you think of all. It's when I used to tell people that running a public company, you're really running two companies. You're running the operating company, but you're also running the public side of the business, and that requires a lot of attention to SEC rules and regs. It requires you to think about how you and do a lot of planning before you launch or initiate any kind of change in the business, because there's a lot of people and a lot of expectations and a lot of people that have an interest in how that company runs. So that's a pretty weighty thing just on the SEC and all the regulatory demands there, and it does put a lot of extra pressure or stress on the business. But if run correctly, and if you are an active participant in the capital markets, which we are, it actually can be very beneficial to keeping and fueling growth, the growth of the business.
Agreed. It's definitely interesting. You're definitely not the first person to say that, where there's kind of a duality of the business. Yes, you got to keep the actual business moving forward and going, but on top of it, there's a whole slew of things that come with being a public business, and that front and going forward and pushing the idea out. It's kind of like in the CEO, one of the roles you're in, especially you, as you said, because your skin is in this game 100%. You are the ultimate advocate for the company because part of it, its success is going to determine yours or not in this situation. So Scott, I think you did a great job really introducing yourself and talking to people about your motivations, your past experience, how this whole Shift Pixie story came to be in origin, so to speak. And what's the thing you're most excited about diving into in these interviews? Just curious.
What I love is some of the innovations and market discoveries that we've made, and we've actually kind of built a way to actually exploit some market weaknesses, and our journey kind of took us down two paths from market data that we were getting, and so I'm kind of excited about what's next for the business, and it's actually right around the corner for us in September. So a lot of the work that we've done is actually coming to fruition now. And a lot of the stuff that we've invested heavily in is about to become very valuable. So exciting times ahead for us.
Perfect. It sounds like we're going to have a lot to talk about over these upcoming interviews, Scott. So I look forward to it. And thank you, everybody, for watching. If you have any questions, please send them over to us and we will happily dive into them for you. And by all means, stay tuned for more coming soon. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful meeting you.
Good to be with you, Michael. Take care.